You've helped so many victims. You've seen so many of your victims go missing,
Mm-hmm.
which definitely has an effect on you.
Mm-hmm.
Why continue to educate about public pathology? Why is it so important to you to keep doing this?
Because psychopathy is our #1 public health risk. You know, it's not STDs, you know, it's not AIDS. It's people without a conscience, and they destroy, you know, millions of lives, of productive lives, of children's lives, and impact every part of our society. It impacts not only relationally, but it impacts our legal system, our criminal system, our social service system. It impacts every part of our lives. It is a public health crisis in this country, and we'll continue to, you know, keep shining the light on the predatory nature of psychopathy.
Can psychopaths be cured?
Well, genetic psychopaths, technically no. I mean, we are talking about very impacted neurology, many parts of the brain size, brain volume, brain chemistry, brain circuitry, major problems. And to a lesser degree, same problems in narcissism and sociopaths, that there are similar brain regions that are impacted. For instance, a lot of people don't know that there are parts of, there are centers of the brain that are responsible for empathy. And part of what psychopathy is inability to have empathy. And that is a brain region, and it happens to be one of the brain regions that is impacted in narcissism and with sociopaths, with psychopaths. And so, no, I think this speaks to why psychology has been not successful in curing these kinds of disorders, because it's not a psychology issue. It is really a neurology issue. And so can they be cured? No, not at this time.
So the key has to be education.
It has to be detection. That our ability to detect pathology in other people, and until the last few years, when there's been a focus on narcissism and psychopathy, there has been no public pathology education in this country. And we did some math, and so we took how many, the population of the United States, and figured out approximately how many psychopaths, how many sociopaths, how many narcissists. And then we multiplied that by 5 people in each one of those pathologically disordered people's lives that they've harmed because of their pathology. And that's being generous. Only 5. We know these people do some extreme damage. And we came up with 60 million people in the United States being harmed by someone else's pathology. And I mean seriously harmed. And if that was a medical disorder, if that was, you know, a new type of cancer or depression or whatever, 60 million people, there would be a national billboard campaign, there would be a celebrity spokesperson, there would be money, you know, towards funding and research. And yet, what a psychiatrist I know said, you know, psychopathy is the #1 public health crisis in this country because of how many people and children that it impacts, and how many societal systems that those harmed people are then funneled through. Dr. Kent Keel, who is one of the neuroscientists that have been doing the neuroimaging of the psychopath's brain, says that psychopathy costs $40 billion a year, and that it costs 10 times more than what depression costs. And yet we have no public pathology education campaign to teach people how to spot them. 1 in 25 people have psychopathy. They're one of the #1 public health crisis problems in our public health in our country, and yet almost no help for people to learn to identify it, until it's too late.
And that's just so alarming, those
Yes.
numbers that you just announced, so alarming. Sandra, you're doing a great job, though, trying to educate people about pathology. How many women women and men, have you directly helped?
Well, I've been in the field for 25 years, so thousands, by now, and our impact with public pathology education, through media, TV, radio, print, our books, whatever, website, millions. But we're just, an agency, trying to be the voice for other people, but this is a campaign that needs to be picked up on the public health level.
The number of victims that you've worked with is very large. How are these people so misreading someone's pathology?
Well, everybody misreads pathology. If we've not been educated, there's no public pathology education. How would anyone ever learn what pathology looks like? And one of the telltale signs in pathology is the charming, glib, and way they hide, and that they hide well. I mean, this is part of the problem. Dr. Robert Hare, who is the world's leading expert on psychopathy, calls it a disorder of social hiding, that they hide well. And that is part of the characteristic that psychopaths, are amongst us in our daily lives. We're not talking about people that are merely in the criminal population. These are white-collar executives that walk in, every field. And that part of the way that they continue on is because they remain largely undetected, because part of their skill set is their ability to hide well. So, if we have a country that doesn't teach pathology education, there is, and by nature their disorder, they hide well, then it becomes a problem that none of us know how to spot them. And one of the things I appreciate about Dr. Hare is that he often tells on himself. He will say how many times he's been fooled by a psychopath. Now, here's the world's leading expert on psychopaths. He worked, I'm not sure if he's still there, but he worked for the Canadian prison system. And so he would, pull in to the prison system, and you would think he'd be sitting out in the parking lot getting his game head on. Okay, he's getting ready to go in on the psychopathic unit, that he would be thinking, okay, if their lips are moving, they're lying. Let me get my game head on. And yet he talks about, he has their file, seeing all the stuff they've been convicted of. He's interacted with them before. He knows they are, very disordered, and yet he's often fooled by them.
Is there a common profile that women share who fall for these psychopaths, or I shouldn't say fall, get trapped by these psychopaths?
Well, there is, and it's been a long time coming. At 25 years of working in this field, I kept seeing the same type of person over and over again, and it didn't make any sense to me. Um, we work mostly in an outpatient setting that is not a community agency, so we're a private practice. And so people that were coming in were not necessarily people from shelters or things like that. And our average client had a bachelor's degree or higher, and were professional women, doctors, attorneys, every walk of life, super professional, and yet, and in their jobs did such a great job. And then there's this subsector, this thing going on in their relationships in which they might be super astute in their career, and in the interpersonal part of that, they were drawn into a relationship, with a psychopath. And so when you look at that on the surface, you think, how can that be? How can there be a teacher, a therapist, a doctor, an attorney, on one hand, that is so proficient and skilled, and on the other hand, end up in a relationship with such profound pathology? And when I went to research that, there was no research. There was absolutely none. There was all this research on women, for instance, in domestic violence, sort of the profile of that did not fit the profile of the women that we were seeing. And not all psychopaths are violent, and so those statistics really weren't helping us. And I kept looking and looking sort of for the profile of women who love psychopaths, and there was nothing. And so several years ago, we did the first research project in looking at, is there something there? Given the nature of psychopaths, sociopaths, narcissists, what they do is not random. They target, they are predator based, and so they have someone that works for them. And so who is that person? Again, if we go back to public pathology education, if we can figure out who they target, we can know who's at risk.
Considering that they are predatory based, meaning what they do is not by accident, that we began to ask the question, is there a person, are there traits, who are they targeting, who are they attracted to, who works for them in terms of what they are seeking to get out of a relationship. And so that's sort of what motivated us to begin to look and test women who have been in relationships with psychopaths. And it's kind of, it's a hard thing to do, because you don't ever want to imply that a victim has done anything that has warranted that. And that is not what we are saying. We are looking at a predator and working backwards, trying to figure out if we can identify the traits that they are interested in, we will know where prevention education needs to go. We'll know who they are hunting and who they are targeting. I mean, they do the same thing in criminal profiling. If a serial killer has, killed someone, they begin looking at putting together a profile and the traits of the person that they targeted to know who they're going to target again. Why not now? Why not do that with the most predatory people on the planet? They don't have to kill people in order to do profound damage to people that they are in relationships with. So we sort of took that, we call it pathology profiling instead of criminal profiling. And we began to look at, are there commonalities in the women that they pick? Are there any kind of trait elevations, anything that we can begin to explore deeper? And so the first go round, we tested about 75 women who had been in relationships with people in that low conscience spectrum. And what we found were trait elevations, that there were personality traits that were sort of off the Richter scale. If you were going to look at them on a bell curve, I mean, there was no bell curve. It looked like the Rocky Mountains coming off the end of the graph paper. I remember sending it to the creator of the instrument, and he said, "Holy cow, that's not what I expected to see." And so what we found were elevations in traits like hyper empathy, really high levels of empathy, high levels of tolerance, very high in what we call relationship investment, meaning that they are highly emotionally invested in their relationships. They're not, casual kinds of relationship. High levels of cooperation, trust, loyalty. Trust being what we call blind trust. That they may not know that person from Adam, and or may have known them a brief amount of time, and yet put all their eggs, if you will, in someone's basket without necessarily proof of that person is trustworthy. Same thing with loyalty. We call it insane loyalty, in which even when there's violations that happen as the relationship progresses, they don't tend to respond to loyalty violations the way that people who don't have these trait elevations. And so there were 26, I believe, trait elevations. And so when you take that as a snapshot, you begin to look at someone that has high empathy, high tolerance, high relationship, high trust, this is like a cocktail of personality for inevitable harm. And then you take, a low conscience partner who looks for people who has these kinds of traits, and you have these relationships of inevitable harm. And so that was our first go round, and looking at utilizing this one instrument to see. And so now we're going back through again, and in partnership with Purdue University, we are doing it again with another instrument. And from all sort of predictions that we're seeing as things are beginning to come in, is that we're going to get the same outcome, that there really is a personality profile of people that psychopaths tend to target. And that has all sorts of profound implications. I think it does for, for public pathology education, but also these women have had a horrible time in getting the right kinds of treatment. They get labeled codependent, and codependency kinds of approaches that therapists have unknowingly, used with them, have produced almost nothing in their own, recovery and treatment. And so the ability to sculpt a specific kind of treatment for them based on these trait elevations, not only for what they've already been through for a psychopath, but these people are at really high risk of repeating because they are who a psychopath wants, not just now, but a psychopathic boss, a psychopathic, it could be in friendships or what have you, that these people carry their temperament traits with them, and they are the ones, at most risk of being targeted again. And so the ability to work with them to understand these unusual trait elevations in them, about how they have to learn to be in the world, how they, given so much empathy, tolerance, blind trust, insane loyalty, that how are they going to learn to protect themselves in the future? Because they will always be a target. I mean, if there's, if you're at a cocktail party and there's a person that has these elevated traits, and then there's a person who does not, and the psychopath approaches both, who do you think he's going to stick to like glue?
The one with the elevated trait.
Absolutely. The other one's going to blow him off, or, he's going to poke and prod and kind of feel around in that relationship, and he's going to, be hitting a wall there, and he's going to move on. Mm-hmm. He's going to keep going till he finds some of those traits. Years ago, I had a few psychopathic males in group one time, and I asked them. I said, "How do you pick? You're pretty good at this. How do you do it?" And they said, two of them said, "You tell a sad story. It's always really good if you can tell, that you were abused as a child, and see how she responds to that." And so what they're testing is empathy, and one of the trait elevations in these women is hyper empathy, and so so they know who they're looking for, and they're always gonna be testing that. And so there very much is a profile. We do know that there is a profile of women who end up in these relationships. Ironically, it is these elevated super traits that predators target that make her so at risk in the past, in the present, and in the future, because we take those temperament traits with us. But ironically, it is those exact temperament traits that are her strength and her resources, and the things that she will tap into to be able to recover, and to get through recovery and to recover with. And it is those exact trait elevations that put her at risk that are also going to be the things that take her into recovery.
Let's talk about when a woman with these high temperament traits meets a psychopath, the beginning stages, the luring, the attachment, the bonding right at the very beginning.
Well, after hearing thousands of stories, you begin to hear the commonalities. Every once in a while, you'll have someone that the beginning parts of the relationship were not good. But
90 to 95% of the women say exactly the same thing, which is the incredible intensity of the attraction in these relationships. And one of the traits of psychopathy is the superficial charm. That is one of the diagnostic criteria, is that these people are charming. If they all arrived into the relationship with the swastika between their eyes, like Charlie Manson, hey, we'd all see him coming. But that's not,
the case.
that's not the case. That the beginning parts of the relationship is the masks that we call that they wear, and this is their skill set. That they're good at hiding who they really are, and they're good at mirroring back and parroting back what that person is looking for. And one of the things that the women always talk about is this intensity of attachment, and that the relationship in the beginning parts has an unusual intensity. And that intensity gets misread. I think people think of that intensity as sort of the myths that we all hear about, our Prince Charming kind of thing, that when you hit all this intensity, oh my God, that must be soulmate status. That you're, within 24 hours, you're, inhaling and exhaling each other's air. I mean, you're never apart after that moment, and that these people are very intense to experience. And for most of the general public who has never experienced a psychopath, of course we don't know what that intensity is. I know what the intensity is because I've had them as patients in the past. And I know that they are intense to experience. But a person meeting this person for the first time at a party or whatever, that intensity has this electric vibe to it. These people are very alive. And all the women talk about the same thing, the charmingness of it and this unusual intensity that they misread as sort of soulmate status. And we do a training for therapists in which we talk about that intensity. And that intensity is often a characteristic of the disorder. But when you have no idea that this person is disordered, you're going to read that intensity however it is that you read it. You just think it's this really cool, sensual vibe thing that's happening between the two of you, and you don't really know.